When 8-year-old Harper stepped through the front door that afternoon, Diesel thought his eyes were lying to him. Her scalp was raw, torn in uneven patches where hair should have been. Dirt streaked her cheeks, cutting lines through the dried tears. She couldn't speak. She just collapsed into his arms, shaking so hard he felt it in his bones. Diesel had been a Hell's Angel for 30 years. He'd seen cruelty in every shape, but nothing prepared him for this. Within a single day, hundreds of riders would descend on the town. And what happened next? No one saw coming. Before moving to the story, subscribe to our channel and share with us your unique stories. The house was wrapped in one of those heavy late afternoon silences, the kind where the air feels thick and colors look muted. Diesel had been sorting tools on the kitchen counter, half distracted by the radio humming in the background. Nothing seemed out of place, until the front door slammed so hard the walls shivered. It wasn't a sound Harper ever made. She was gentle by nature, even in the smallest habits. She closed things softly, walked lightly, never rushed. But this crash of wood against the frame was sharp, frantic, wrong. He turned toward the hall just in time to see her standing there. Backlit by the sun, her outline looked uneven, jagged. And then his eyes focused. What was left of her hair clung to her head in torn clumps. Raw patches of scalp gleamed angrily where strands had been ripped out. Dirt smeared across her face. Tears had cut thin tracks through it all. For a heartbeat, Diesel's mind refused the image. It was too brutal, too sudden, too impossible to place on his daughter. Harper tried to breathe, but the sound came out broken. Short, panicked gasps. No words. No explanations. Just fear. Diesel's hands rose automatically, though his fingers trembled mid-air. It was as if touching her would make the horror real. When he finally reached her, he did it slowly, carefully, as if she were something shattered that might crumble with too much pressure. She stepped into his chest without hesitation. Her small body shook against him, every tremor a silent confession of what she'd endured. Diesel wrapped his arms around her and held on. There were no words that fit moments like this. Language felt clumsy in the face of her trembling, in the face of those torn patches on her head. So he did the only thing he could. He held her tighter, steadying her breaths with his own. As he brushed the back of her head, he felt the uneven stubble, the places where hair hadn't been cut but ripped. Harper flinched, not from his touch, but from the memory. The recoil traveled through Diesel's body like an electric shock. He pulled back just enough to see her face. Red, swollen eyes, dirty cheeks, lips trembling from the effort of holding back more tears. And beneath all of that, something worse. Shame. As if she believed she'd done something wrong. His confusion hardened into understanding. Understanding hardened into something darker. A slow, rising heat in his chest. Not the reckless anger of a man looking for a fight. Something deeper. Something ancient. Something protective. But she wasn't ready to speak. He could see it. Her gaze stayed glued to the floor, as if looking at him might make the humiliation sharper. So he didn't ask. Not yet. The room around them felt unnaturally still. Not quiet, still. The kind of stillness that settles in moments when life takes a turn, when the world holds its breath to see what a father will do. Diesel lifted her chin gently. Eventually, her eyes met his. What he saw in them hollowed him out. Fear, humiliation, and beneath it all, the instinct to apologize. An apology she didn't owe the world. An apology she didn't owe anyone. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like something fragile breaking open. It wasn't just today. Diesel's stomach dropped. She wasn't talking about a single moment. She was talking about something much older, much heavier. The beginning of the truth was finally surfacing. And Diesel could already feel a storm forming inside him, one that would not quiet until he had answers. Harper's words came slowly, as if each one had to be pulled up from a place she didn't want to return to. Diesel didn't rush her. He stayed kneeling in front of her, hands steady on her arms, grounding her. "It didn't start today," she whispered. And with that, the hidden months began to unravel. Started small. Always does. 3 boys. Older, louder, confident in the way children become when no one ever tells them no. They started with whispers. Names muttered behind her back during art class. Snickers when she walked past in the hallway. Comments about her drawings. How weird they were. How she was too quiet. How she cried too easily. "You're so sensitive," they'd sneer. The first time it happened, she thought maybe she misheard. The second time, she tried to ignore it. The third time, she finally looked to an adult for help. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The teacher's phrase that changed everything. Harper told Diesel about the woman she'd spoken to. An aide. Someone who supervised the hall often. When Harper tried to explain the whispers, the mocking, the stolen supplies, the aide cut her off with a sigh. "You're too sensitive, sweetheart. Just ignore them." Those 4 words became the shield the boys hid behind. If the adults weren't taking it seriously, why should they? The escalation. Diesel listened as Harper described the next weeks. Her sketchbook went missing. She found it later under the bleachers, pages torn and smeared. Her pencils snapped inside her backpack. Her lunch dumped out behind the cafeteria. Her books knocked from her arms, again and again, just to watch her scramble. She reported it every time. Every time she heard the same reply. "You're too sensitive." And then it got physical. A shove when teachers weren't looking. A foot stuck out to trip her in the hall. A hand smacking the back of her head hard enough to make her gasp. Still no intervention. Still the same dismissal. Maybe, Harper said softly, maybe they were right. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she made too big a deal out of things. Diesel's jaw locked. Not because she said it, but because she believed it. The truth adults didn't want to admit. Harper continued, voice trembling as she talked. The boys weren't just popular, they were protected. Their parents were donors. Big ones. Harper didn't fully understand what that meant, but Diesel did. Money shapes meetings. Money shapes conversations. Money shapes silence. And these parents had money that practically built the school's new wing. So when their sons misbehaved, incidents didn't happen, they misunderstandings. Reports didn't exist, they got misplaced. Victims didn't speak up, they were too sensitive. Harper hugged herself as she talked, as if trying to make her small body smaller. Diesel felt something inside him twist tight enough to hurt. This wasn't chaos. It was allowed. Adults saw it. Teachers saw it. Staff saw it. And every single one of them decided looking away was easier. Easier than paperwork. Easier than conflict. Easier than upsetting wealthy parents. Diesel's breathing grew heavy, controlled only by will. Because this wasn't a story about children being cruel. This was a story about adults choosing convenience over responsibility. And today was the breaking point. Harper's voice cracked as she said it. It didn't start today. Today was just the worst part. Diesel pulled her into his chest again. Held her. Held the shaking. Held the truth. A truth that built slowly, layer after layer, until it finally collapsed on an 8-year-old girl standing alone behind a gym. The storm Diesel felt earlier? It was no longer rising. It was awake. It was ready. And for the first time, Diesel knew that whatever happened today was not random brutality. It was the final result of 8 months of cruelty the adults had chosen not to stop. Harper's breathing was uneven as she reached the part Diesel dreaded most. The part that brought her home shaking. The part that tore her hair out in jagged clumps. He didn't speak. Didn't move. He simply listened, bracing himself. The walk after school. It had started like any normal dismissal. The bell rang. Kids spilled out of classrooms, laughing, shouting, zipping backpacks, racing toward the buses. The usual chaos. Harper waited, like she always did, letting the crowd thin before heading to the pickup area. It made things feel safer. She lingered a little longer that day, pretending to tie her shoe by the bike racks while she scanned for them. She didn't see the boys, so she started walking, small, alone, clutching her sketchbook tight against her chest, the way a scared kid clutches a shield. Then the air changed. Footsteps behind her, purposeful, close, 3 sets. Her stomach tightened. She didn't need to turn around to know. They moved in front of her, cutting off her path to the parking lot. Their shadows stretched across the pavement in long, distorted shapes. Harper tried to step sideways. They stepped with her. No words at first, just smirks, wide, cruel, practiced. They'd planned this. The wall. One shoved her backward, forcing her against the rough brick of the gym. Even then, Harper hoped it would be like the other times. A shove, a taunt, a stolen item, something she could endure. But this wasn't that. The razor. The tallest boy reached into his backpack. At first, Harper didn't understand what she was seeing. The object didn't fit in the hands of a child. Then she heard it. A click. A low hum. A mechanical buzz that grew louder as he raised it toward her head. An electric razor. Harper's breath broke in half. She shook her head, pleading without words. They didn't care. 2 grabbed her arms, pinned her to the wall. The razor touched the side of her scalp, and she screamed. The sound they laughed at. Her scream wasn't a single sound. It was a whole body panic, torn out of her lungs. The boys laughed. The more she twisted, the tighter they held her. Tufts of hair fell fast, scattering across the pavement like torn feathers. Her tears blurred everything. Her throat burned from crying. She begged for help, but after-school hours meant empty halls, empty fields, empty windows. No one came. No one even heard her. The phone. Just when she thought it was over, when the razor finally stopped buzzing, one boy pulled out his phone. He leaned in to film her. Close. Too close. The lens captured everything. Her tears, her shaking hands, her ripped hair, her humiliation. She collapsed to her knees, trying desperately to scoop up the fallen strands, as if gathering them could undo what had been done. They filmed that too. Her desperation, her devastation, her silence. Then they ran off, laughing as they went. Laughing. The video spread before she even got home. Harper didn't know that the footage was already being passed from phone to phone, flying through group chats. She didn't know that by the time she sprinted home, wind tearing at the uneven patches on her scalp, dozens of kids had already watched her worst moment. She didn't know her father would soon see it. She didn't know her humiliation was turning into entertainment. All she knew was the weight of her hair in her hands, and the ringing silence of a place where adults should have been, but weren't. The moment that broke her. When Harper finished recounting it, her voice faltered into silence. Diesel felt something inside him go still. Not numb, not detached. Still, the way a fuse sits still before it burns. He carried her to the couch, tucked a blanket around her shaking shoulders, and kissed the top of her head where stubble scratched his lips. Then he stood up. He stepped into the kitchen, and he reached for his phone. His hands shook, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. He called a number he hadn't dialed in years. It rang once, twice, then, "Talk to me, brother." Diesel swallowed. "It's Harper." A silence followed. A long, dangerous silence. "What happened?" Diesel told him. Not every detail. Not the scream. Not the way her hair littered the pavement. Not the trembling. But enough. Enough for the man on the other end to understand. The reply came low and certain. "We're handling this. You're not alone." The message began to spread. Within minutes, phones buzzed across counties, across states. Riders climbed out of bed, left diners, stepped out of garages, pulled on jackets. Men who had never met Harper didn't hesitate. They understood the code. A child had been harmed. A brother had been failed. The system had looked away. Now it was their turn to look directly at the truth. By sunrise, hundreds would be riding toward that school. Not for revenge, but for something far more powerful. Accountability, visibility, presence too loud to ignore, and too disciplined to twist into violence. The engines began before dawn, low, growing, rolling like thunder across the sleeping town. What was coming next would change everything. The sun had barely begun to rise when the town felt it. Before anyone saw headlights, before anyone heard engines clearly. A vibration, low, steady, strange enough to rattle windows in their frames. At first people thought it might be distant thunder, passing storm, something natural. But storms fade. This didn't. The sound grew heavier. Parents sipping coffee on their porches paused mid-sip. Joggers slowed to a confused stop. Teachers arriving early froze with their keys halfway into their car doors. The sound carried across the quiet neighborhoods in a rolling wave that grew with every passing second. A warning, promise, a shift in the air. And then someone saw the first light. Headlights cresting the hill. One at first, then three, then dozens. A line of motorcycles stretched down the main road, gleaming under the early morning haze, so long that it blurred into the horizon. They rode in formation, not chaotic, not unruly, not wild, disciplined, precision tight, unified, 300 strong, the largest gathering the town had ever seen. And they weren't speeding, they weren't weaving, they were moving with purpose so controlled it made the hair on people's arms rise. Parents pulled their children inside. Curtains snapped shut. Doors locked. Whispers filled kitchens and living rooms. Teachers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to step forward or back. The principal pulled into the school lot seconds too late to pretend she didn't see what was unfolding. Her hand shook as she tried to call 911. She stammered into the phone, unable to describe the sight clearly. But by the time the dispatcher understood what she was saying, the riders were already turning onto school property. 300 engines roared as they circled the school. They filled every edge of the campus, the front, the sides, the back fields. Walls of leather and chrome formed an unbroken line around the building. Their engines echoed off the brick in deep, thunderous waves, until it felt like the school itself was trembling. And then, one by one, those engines went silent. Not all at once. A sequence. A controlled, deliberate wave of quiet. A roar collapsing into stillness. A stillness heavier than the noise. Silence can be more terrifying than shouting. The men dismounted. Boots struck pavement in synchronized rhythms. Not rushing. Not shouting. Not posturing. Just stepping into formation. Shoulder to shoulder. Surrounding the school like a protective wall. The principal watched from behind the glass doors, her breath caught in her chest. She braced for chaos, for threats, for the kind of scene newspapers love to twist. But none of that happened. They didn't approach her. They didn't demand anything. They didn't even look angry. They simply stood, 300 silent witnesses, waiting for the truth to finally matter. Meanwhile, the wealthy parents awoke to panic. Their phones rang nonstop. Voicemails piled up. Neighbors sent frantic texts. Turn on the news. Check the school. You need to get down there. They scrambled, pulling on clothes, barking orders at their lawyers, demanding answers that no one could provide quickly enough. For years, their money had protected them. This morning, it meant nothing, because no donation could counter what 300 disciplined men were making impossible to ignore. This wasn't the beginning of violence. It was the beginning of consequence. Inside the school, tension spread like smoke. Staff members peeked through windows. Students arriving early froze, staring wide-eyed at the silent wall of motorcycles. Police arrived, lights flashing, but even they hesitated. Not out of fear, out of respect. Something in the air told them this wasn't a mob. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't retaliation. It was accountability standing in leather and denim. Diesel chose 3 men. While 300 stood guard outside, Diesel didn't walk the whole army into the school. He didn't need to. He chose only 3. Men he trusted. Men who understood why they were there. Men who would not act from anger but from purpose. They followed him toward the front doors. Teachers watched from the hallway, stepping back instinctively as Diesel approached. He pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in a way that seemed to echo through the entire building. The secretary looked up, face blanching white. Papers slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. She didn't pick them up. Before she could speak, the principal emerged from her office. Drawn by the presence she could feel even before she saw it. Her eyes flicked from Diesel to the 3 silent men behind him, to the 300 waiting outside. Fear rippled across her face. Not fear of violence, fear of truth. Diesel's voice was calm, too calm. Who let this happen to my daughter? The question didn't echo. Settled. Heavy, sharp, impossible to dodge. The principal's lips parted, but no lie came out, only a trembling breath. She stepped aside and gestured to her office. "We should talk," she whispered. Diesel entered, the men at his back. The door closed behind them. Outside, 300 riders didn't move an inch. They didn't shift. They didn't speak. They just waited. Silent, steady, unmistakable. And inside that office, the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. The principal's office felt smaller than Harper's bedroom. The air was tight, stale, heavy with the weight of everything that had been ignored, hidden, dismissed. Diesel didn't sit. Neither did the men behind him. They stood like immovable pillars, their silence louder than shouting, more commanding than threats. The principal's eyes flicked between them, her hands trembling at her sides. Diesel spoke first, quietly, steadily. "Start talking." The teacher's drawer. The principal swallowed hard before reaching into a folder on her desk. She hesitated, but Diesel waited, expression unreadable. Finally, she pulled out a stack of papers, notes written over the past 8 months. Observations, reports, descriptions of bullying incidents, all recorded in neat handwriting. Harper's name appeared again and again. She kept these in her locked drawer, the principal admitted. She documented everything. Diesel stared at the stack. "Why didn't anyone do anything?" he asked. The answer came out as a whisper. "She didn't report it." "She saw it," Diesel said, voice tightening. "She wrote it. Why didn't she act?" The principal's silence was enough. Neglect disguised as diligence. The teacher wrote notes to protect herself, not Harper. She saw the tripping. She saw the shoves. She saw the boys corner Harper in the hallway. She wrote it all down, and did nothing. Not a warning. Not a call home. Not a single follow-up. Just piles of paper in a drawer, waiting for someone to someday ask why she'd never used them. Then came the administration's part. The principal opened another folder, this one marked with Diesel's name. Inside were 3 formal complaints, filed by Diesel himself. Each one detailed harassment, escalating aggression, mocking, physical intimidation, stolen property, fear in Harper's behavior. He had reported all of it. Not once, not twice, 3 times. He stared at the papers, jaw tightening. "You read these," Diesel said. The principal nodded, eyes brimming with guilt. "And you ignored them." I didn't ignore them," she stammered. "I handled them quietly." "Quietly," Diesel repeated, his voice so calm it chilled the room. "You buried them." Her breath hitched. "Those boys, their families, the donors." There it was. The truth, ugly and inevitable. The boys' parents were major contributors. Fundraisers, names spoken with reverence in board meetings. People who controlled budgets with a single signature. They threatened to pull funding, the principal confessed. They said if their sons were written up again, they'd take their money elsewhere, Diesel finished. She nodded. Tears gathered in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to get this bad. I thought if we handled it quietly. Diesel stepped closer. You thought wrong. And then the final blow, the video. A knock interrupted them. A police officer stepped in. Someone the principal clearly hadn't expected to see. He held a phone in his hand. We received a video this morning, he said. Came from a parent. Already circulating. Diesel knew what video it was. The worst moment of Harper's life, recorded and shared like entertainment. The officer continued. This is no longer a school matter. It's criminal. The principal's knees nearly buckled. Because now the decision wasn't in her hands. The truth had outrun the silence. The wealthy parents arrived next. They burst through the office door with lawyers trailing behind them, outraged, indignant, still clinging to the belief that money could fix anything. They threatened lawsuits, demanded meetings, insisted their boys were good kids who made a mistake. But their voices faltered as they glanced out the window, where 300 riders stood in perfect stillness. A wall of protection, a wall of witnesses, a wall of people who weren't leaving, not until justice was real. The playbook didn't work anymore. Threats lost their power. Lawyers stammered. Parents realized influence meant nothing in this room. Because the evidence existed. The police had it. The town was watching. And 300 men outside made sure no one twisted the story. The room shifted. For the first time since all this began, the balance of power flipped. Not toward Diesel. Not toward the bikers. Not even toward the police. Toward the truth. The wealthy parents began cracking. One father, the loudest, the most arrogant, suddenly collapsed into a chair and covered his face, shoulders shaking. I knew something was wrong with him, he sobbed. I thought if I donated enough, it would go away. It didn't make him innocent. It didn't erase his neglect. But it exposed a truth few ever admit. Systems don't break on their own. People break them. People who fear consequences more than they value integrity. The school board arrived next, summoned to confront their own complicity. They tried to ask Diesel to wait outside. He didn't move. Neither did the men behind him. The board members exchanged looks. Then one of them gestured weakly. Fine. Stay. They knew better than to insist. Consequences finally came. The first decisions were immediate. 2 boys were expelled without negotiation. Their academic records would reflect their actions permanently. Their parents protested, but the evidence, the video, the notes, the complaints, left no room for denial. The 3rd boy, the hesitant one, was given long-term suspension and mandatory counseling. His parents didn't argue. They simply nodded, devastated but relieved to finally get him help. The teacher was suspended pending license review. Her meticulous notes became proof of her negligence. The principal was placed on administrative leave. Investigation pending. No guarantee of return. And the wealthy parents had their donations returned in full. Their influence revoked. Their names removed from special committees. Their power severed. Justice wasn't loud in that room. It was steady, final, inevitable. Asterisk, asterisk. Diesel didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He just breathed. A slow exhale that released months of helplessness. The truth was out. The system was correcting. But Diesel knew justice wasn't the end. Protection was. And he wasn't finished yet. The morning after the board meeting felt strangely quiet, as if the entire town were holding its breath. Word had spread. First in whispers, then in full voice, and everyone seemed to be replaying the same question in their minds. How did it get this far? In diner booths, in grocery store lines, outside gas stations, people spoke Harper's name with a mixture of guilt, anger, and awe. What had happened had peeled back a layer of the town no one wanted to examine. They were used to small problems, small dramas, small consequences. But this was different. A system had failed a child, and now the cracks were visible to everyone. The school moved first, not out of nobility but necessity. Emergency meetings were called before the sun was fully up. Administrators, shaken by what they had witnessed, realized they couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. Not after 300 riders showed up simply because the school hadn't done its job. Not after parents, ordinary working parents, stood in hallways demanding to know how a child had been ignored for 8 months. People who had once been comfortable became uncomfortable overnight. The district superintendent, normally stoic, looked years older as he addressed his staff. "No more suggestions," he said. "From now on, accountability is policy." What followed wasn't performative, it was structural. Mandatory reporting became immediate reporting. No delays. No, "we'll look into it." No, "kids will be kids." Every incident had to be documented. Every single one. Teachers, suddenly aware of how easily silence becomes violence, took the new protocols seriously. Forms filled faster. Meetings ran longer. Conversations happened that had been avoided for years. Change didn't arrive triumphantly. It arrived through tired hands, sleepless nights, and the weight of understanding that ignoring a child had nearly destroyed her. Students found their voices, too. It started with a 5th grader, a boy who once hovered on the sidelines of Harper's torment, too scared to intervene. He approached a counselor one morning and muttered, "I saw something months ago. I should have said something." Then another student stepped forward. A girl, quiet, eyes red. Then another, and another. Not just about Harper, about themselves. About moments they had swallowed because adults had taught them their pain wasn't important enough. A culture built on silence began to break. And beyond the town, the Brotherhood was listening. Hell's Angels chapters across the state heard the story before reporters did. First in phone calls, then in group chats, then in clubhouse meetings where men who rarely spoke of emotions found themselves asking the same thing. What if this is happening elsewhere? Their support spread in waves. A chapter in another state started its own school outreach. Another formed a hotline for kids who felt unsafe. Another organized safe walk programs for vulnerable students. It wasn't about publicity. It wasn't about image. It was the same principle that drove them in the first place. Protection is everyone's responsibility. And the world began to notice. Even the boys who had caused the harm were changing, but not in the way their parents expected. One of them, quietest of the 3 but no less guilty, had been ordered into counseling as part of his disciplinary plan. He resisted at first, arms crossed, eyes down, waiting out the clock. But week after week, something softened. Whether it was the counselor's relentlessness, or the absence of the friends who once fed his cruelty, or the consequences he finally couldn't outrun, no one knew for sure. Months later, he wrote Harper a letter. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. "I hurt you. I know I did. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. But I want you to know I'm trying to change. Not because someone told me to. Because I want to." Harper didn't reply. She wasn't ready. But she read it. She folded it carefully. She put it in a drawer. And she felt something shift inside her. Not all at once, but softly, the way thawing happens in winter. People questioned whether a story like this could change anything. Some said no. Some said nothing ever changes. Kids still get bullied. Wealthy families still pull strings. Adults still look away. And they weren't wrong. But Diesel understood something most people didn't. Every act of protection shifts the balance. Every time someone stands up, the world gets a little less dark. Maybe not everywhere. Maybe not for everyone. But for Harper? For Harper, things had changed forever. The police remembered that day, too. When the principal called 911, her voice shaking so badly the dispatcher asked twice if she was in danger. Officers expected chaos. They expected shouting. They expected confrontation. They expected a riot. What they found was the opposite. 300 men in leather, standing shoulder to shoulder, silently. One officer later described the scene as reverent, like a ceremony nobody rehearsed but everyone understood. The sergeant said it was the calmest, most disciplined confrontation he had ever witnessed. No threats, no aggression, just a quiet, immovable promise to stay until justice was done. And that promise became the town's legacy. Not the engines, not the spectacle, not the consequences. It was the discipline, the solidarity, the unspoken vow. We stay until she's safe. We stay until she's heard. We stay until she's protected. Those ripples reached far beyond the school walls. They reached families, districts, communities, even strangers who had never heard Harper's name. A reminder that change is possible, even in quiet places, even in overlooked towns, even when the world feels unmoving. Healing doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives like this, slow, gentle, growing in the cracks pain left behind. Harper's story wasn't just changing rules. It was changing people. And that, Diesel realized, was the real beginning. Healing never announces itself with fireworks. It slips in unnoticed, like sunlight sneaking through blinds after months of overcast skies. And for Harper, healing didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in subtle, fragile moments that Diesel almost missed. The first shift came at night. For weeks, Harper had woken from nightmares, sometimes trembling, sometimes silent, sometimes crawling into Diesel's room without a word. He would lift the blanket, make space, and hold her while she steadied her breathing. But one night, a simple, unremarkable Thursday, Diesel went to check on her before bed. The lamp he always kept on for her, soft and steady, was off. Harper was sleeping peacefully in the dark, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm untouched by fear. He didn't say anything the next morning. He didn't dare break whatever fragile magic had made it happen. But something inside him eased. A knot he'd forgotten was tied. The next shift came in the morning. Harper sat at her mirror, fingers brushing her hair. Months ago, she touched her scalp with the timid caution of someone afraid of breaking something that was barely returning. But now her hair had grown long enough to rest against her cheekbones. Soft curls, light catching on new strands. Not enough to erase what happened, but enough to reclaim what was stolen. Diesel watched from the doorway as she brushed it with gentle confidence. Each stroke was deliberate, almost ceremonial. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was tending to herself. And Diesel had to turn away for a moment, swallowing emotion he couldn't name without breaking. Because her hair was no longer hair, it was survival. A quiet declaration that cruelty hadn't won. The world around her began shifting too. The kids who once overlooked her now noticed her in a different way. Not out of pity, not out of curiosity, out of respect. The quiet children, the ones who lingered at the edges of playgrounds, who kept their heads down, who carried their own small burdens, gravitated toward her. They saw something in Harper they recognized, and something they needed. She didn't try to lead. She didn't try to inspire. She simply existed with a softness that invited others to breathe. And in doing so, she became a leader of the quiet ones. Her art returned next. It started with a blank page, her fingertips resting lightly on the paper as if asking permission to begin again. Then a faint mark. Then another. Then the beginnings of a shape, unsure at first, then clearer. By the end of the week, she was filling entire pages with sketches. Lines that carried emotion, shadows that revealed depth, colors that spoke louder than words. Diesel never interrupted her, never asked what she was drawing or how it felt. He simply stood in the doorway, watching the weight in her shoulders lighten with each stroke of her pencil. Her art had always been her language, And now she was fluent again. And then came the laugh, the one Diesel had been waiting for. It arrived unexpectedly on a quiet afternoon. Harper was at the table, drawing something she refused to let Diesel see. A bird, a tree, a memory he couldn't tell. She made a small mistake and tried to fix it. But instead of frustration, instead of sadness, instead of that fragile silence that had followed her for so long, she laughed. A clear, bright, unbroken sound. Diesel froze. He didn't breathe. He didn't even blink. Because that sound, that small, perfect sound, was proof the tide had turned. Came and went quickly. But it was enough to ignite something warm inside him. She was coming back. The community felt the shift too. Her classmates, the ones who once stayed silent, began sending cards. Some were clumsy. Some were thoughtful. All were genuine. "I'm sorry I didn't help. I should have said something. You didn't deserve what happened." Children aren't always gentle, but they are honest. Then teachers began changing too. The same adults who once overlooked her now paid careful attention. They checked in. They asked real questions. They listened. For once, the adults were learning. And the bikers, they never left. Not in the loud, chaotic way strangers might imagine. Not with revving engines or dramatic arrivals. They stayed quietly. A few riders escorted nervous kids inside in the mornings. Others ran workshops. Some just showed up to sit in the parking lot. A steady presence, a quiet promise. They were there for the vulnerable ones, the overlooked ones, the kids who didn't know how to ask for help. And Harper, she became something of a little sister to the chapter. Birthdays, check-ins, sketchbooks gifted with quiet smiles, encouragement offered without showmanship. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about protection. The kind of protection the system failed to give her. But the real transformation was happening inside Harper herself. She started standing differently, sitting differently, moving differently. Her shoulders were no longer tucked inward. Her chin wasn't glued to her chest. Her gaze didn't flick away at the first sign of attention. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger, softer, more sure of herself, someone shaped not by trauma, but by the community that held her through it. Harper didn't go back to who she was before. She grew into someone better, someone healed, someone whole. And Diesel, watching her from across the room one evening, realized something. His daughter wasn't just recovering. She was rising. Healing rarely arrives with applause. It arrives quietly, in the space between heartbeats, in the breaths you didn't realize you'd been holding. And for Harper and Diesel, the biggest shift happened on a night so ordinary it felt impossible that something extraordinary could unfold inside it. It began on a quiet Sunday evening, the kind of night that feels suspended between the week that ended and the one about to begin. Diesel sat on the couch, boots still unlaced, shoulders heavy from months of carrying more than any one person should. The TV flickered in front of him, shifting from channel to channel as he pressed buttons without purpose. He wasn't watching. He was drifting, sinking into that strange numbness that comes after too much fear for too long. His mind wandered, back to the call from the school, back to the video, back to the moment he first held his daughter after the truth came out, wishing he could rewind time and shield her from everything she endured. And then, footsteps, soft, light, familiar. He muted the TV. Harper stood in the doorway, framed by the golden lamplight, and Diesel felt his breath leave him in a slow, stunned exhale. Her hair, once violently stripped away, had grown past her ears now, soft curls brushing her cheeks, a glow around her that felt like sunrise after a long winter. But it wasn't her hair that stopped him. It was her presence, calm, steady, centered in a way she hadn't been in months. She didn't speak. She just walked toward him, step slow, deliberate, the kind of walk someone uses when they're not afraid of being seen anymore. Diesel turned off the TV completely. Harper climbed into his lap without hesitation, without trembling, without that fragile silence she used to carry like a weight. Her arms wrapped around his neck. Her small body settled against his chest like she'd come home after a long journey. Diesel froze, then held her, one hand in her hair, one hand across her back. Perfect, quiet fit. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need, because sometimes silence isn't fear, it's healing. Her breathing relaxed into him. Soft, slow, steady. He felt her fingers curl into his shirt, not with desperation, but closeness. A tether, not a plea. He rested his cheek gently against the top of her head. And then, in the softest voice he had ever heard from her, she whispered words that shattered every wall he had built around his heart. "Dad, I'm happy again." Diesel's entire body went still. It wasn't shock. It wasn't disbelief. It was release, like something tight inside him broke without warning. His breath stuttered. His arms tightened. His throat closed. His eyes filled instantly. He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. Those 4 words were everything he had prayed for without ever daring to say it aloud. "Dad, I'm happy again." Months of torment, months of nightmares, months of guilt he never confessed. All of it cracked apart under the weight of those 4 small words. Harper didn't understand what she'd just given him. How could she? She didn't know about the nights he stayed awake long after she fell asleep, staring at the ceiling and replaying everything again and again, begging the universe to give her joy again. She didn't know how he questioned himself every day, convinced he had failed her somehow. She didn't know how heavy a father's guilt can be, even when undeserved. But she gave him the one thing no system, no policy, no consequence could ever offer. Proof that she was okay. Truly okay. Not pretending. Not masking. Not trying to be brave for him. Just happy. And that, more than justice, more than punishment, more than the noise of 100 consequences, was the moment Diesel finally felt the storm end. But Harper's transformation didn't stop there. Her life didn't go back to what it was before. It became something better, something shaped by resilience, surrounded by love, strengthened by recovery. She no longer moved like someone trying to disappear. She walked with quiet confidence. She spoke with gentle certainty. She took up space again, not loudly, but bravely. The students noticed. The teachers noticed. The whole community noticed. She wasn't just the girl who survived. She was the girl who rose. Her artwork blossomed, vibrant, expressive, deeply emotional. A local cafe hung her pieces. Then a community center. Then a small gallery downtown. Diesel watched in awe, realizing his little girl wasn't just healing. She was becoming. And the bikers, they stayed part of her life. Not with fanfare, but with loyalty. Birthday visits, check-in calls, small gifts, sketchbooks, pencils, things that told her they saw who she was becoming. She had become the kid every rider would protect without question. Not out of obligation, but love. And Diesel, he learned to breathe again. He no longer carried guilt like a shadow. He no longer braced for disaster every morning. He no longer questioned whether he had done enough. He watched his daughter laugh, draw, smile, and move through the world with new strength, and he realized he hadn't just saved her, they had saved each other. And Harper's life, full, safe, creative, supported, became the final proof. Not that cruelty doesn't exist. Not that systems don't fail. Not that injustice isn't real. But that good people, when they choose action over silence, can change everything. One father who would not break. One community that refused to look away. 300 men who showed up when it mattered most. Harper didn't get her life back because the world suddenly became fair. She got it back because people chose to stand up. And that, more than punishment, more than fear, more than consequences, is what truly protects children. Protection isn't strength. It's willingness. It's presence. It's courage. Harper's story isn't about perfection. It's about people choosing not to stay silent. And because of that choice, she laughs, she draws, she walks through her school with confidence instead of fear. She is loved, seen, and safe, not defined by what happened to her, defined by what she became after.